Emperor Zarthak, the Eternal, stood in his throne room on the capital world of Corva Prime, staring at the holographic display that showed the collapse of his 500-year-old empire. Red markers indicated lost worlds, dozens of them, falling faster than his military could respond. What had begun as a simple conquest of a primitive species had become an existential nightmare for the greatest power in the galaxy. 6 months had passed since the second defeat at the Sol system. 6 months during which these impossible humans had proven that their victory was no accident. They had taken the offensive with a speed and efficiency that defied everything the Corvans understood about warfare. "Report," Zarthak commanded, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. Supreme Commander Vorthak approached the throne, his usually proud bearing broken by months of defeat. "Your Majesty, we have lost contact with the Altair Defense Fleet. Intelligence suggests human forces captured the entire system 3 days ago. They now control 17 former Imperial worlds. How many ships have we lost in total?" the Emperor asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Over 2,000 vessels, Your Majesty. The humans appear to be capturing most of our ships rather than destroying them. Our intelligence reports suggest they're reverse engineering our technology and incorporating it into their own designs." Zarthak felt his ancient heart skip a beat. 2,000 ships represented nearly half of the Imperial Navy's total strength. Worse, if the humans were capturing Corvan technology, they would only become stronger with each victory. "What of our allies?" he asked. "Surely the Zentari Federation or the hegemony of worlds will assist us against this threat." Vorthak's expression grew even more grim. "Your Majesty, the other galactic powers are observing. They appear to be waiting to see how this conflict resolves before choosing sides. Some intelligence suggests they view humanity's rise as an opportunity to diminish imperial power." The Emperor's claws scraped against the armrests of his throne. For 5 centuries, the Corvan Empire had maintained galactic dominance through fear and superior military force. Other species had submitted to their rule or stayed out of their way. The idea that former allies would abandon them in their moment of need was almost unthinkable. "Show me the tactical analysis of the human advance," Zarthak ordered. The holographic display shifted, showing the steady expansion of human-controlled space. What Zarthak saw made his blood run cold. The humans weren't simply conquering worlds at random. They were following a carefully planned strategy that systematically isolated Imperial strongholds and severed supply lines. Every human attack demonstrated an intimate knowledge of Corvan military doctrine and Imperial infrastructure. They struck at precisely the right targets to cause maximum disruption while minimizing their own losses. It was as if they had spent decades studying the Empire's weaknesses and planning the perfect campaign to exploit them. "How are they moving so fast?" Zarthak demanded. "No species can coordinate attacks across such distances without years of preparation, Your Majesty," Vorthak replied carefully. "Our captured personnel report that humanity has developed communication technology we don't understand. They appear capable of instantaneous coordination across their entire territory. Their fleets can respond to threats faster than our own forces can react." The Emperor rose from his throne and moved to the display, studying the patterns of human expansion. What he saw there filled him with a growing dread. This wasn't the desperate fighting of a cornered species. This was the methodical advance of a superior military force that knew exactly what it was doing. "Where are they now?" he asked. 3 fleets have been identified," Vorthak reported. "The largest is moving toward the Beta Centauri sector. Intelligence suggests they're targeting our shipyards there. The second fleet appears to be heading for the Vega mining colonies. The third? Yes? The third fleet is moving directly toward Corva Prime, Your Majesty." Silence fell in the throne room. Even the Emperor's personal guard, warriors who had never known fear, shifted uncomfortably at this news. Corva Prime was the heart of the Empire, protected by the largest concentration of military force in known space. The idea that any enemy would dare attack it directly was beyond comprehension. "How long until they arrive?" Zarthak asked. "At their current rate of advance, approximately 2 weeks, Your Majesty." The Emperor stared at the display showing the approaching human fleet. According to the sensor readings, it consisted of only 50 ships. a tiny force by Imperial standards. Yet somehow, this small fleet had carved through 3 separate defensive lines without slowing down. Every attempt to intercept them had ended in disaster for the Imperial Navy. "Summon the Defense Council," Zarthak ordered. "Recall every available ship to protect the homeworld. If these humans want to face the full might of the Empire, we will grant their wish." Over the next 10 days, the greatest military force in galactic history assembled around Corva Prime. 8,000 warships, representing the combined strength of 40 star systems, formed defensive formations around the Imperial capital. Massive orbital fortresses, built over centuries to protect the throne world, charged their weapons, and prepared for siege. The humans arrived exactly when their projected course predicted they would. 50 ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Corva system. Facing odds of 160 to 1, Emperor Zarthak watched from his command center deep beneath the planet's surface as his fleet commanders prepared to end the human threat once and for all. Admiral Keth, his most experienced officer, had arranged the Imperial forces in overlapping defensive layers designed to crush any attacker through sheer, overwhelming firepower. "Open a channel to the human fleet," Zarthak commanded. The communication array activated, and a human face appeared on the display. The individual was young by human standards, with calm eyes that showed no fear despite facing impossible odds. When he spoke, his voice carried the same professional tone that had become the hallmark of human military communications. "This is Admiral Jackson of the United Earth Expeditionary Force. We have come to accept the surrender of the Corvan Empire." Shocked silence filled the command center. The arrogance of this statement was beyond belief. 50 ships demanding the surrender of 8,000? It was either insanity or supreme confidence. Zarthak activated his personal communicator. "I am Emperor Zarthak the Eternal, ruler of the Corvan Empire. You face the assembled might of our entire civilization. Withdraw now, and we may consider allowing your species to survive." "You had your chance for negotiation 6 months ago," Admiral Jackson replied. "You chose violence instead. Now you will face the consequences of that choice. You have 10 minutes to order your fleets to stand down. Any ship that fires on human forces will be destroyed." "You are 50 ships against 8,000, Zarthak roared. "What possible threat could you pose?" Admiral Jackson's expression didn't change. "You're about to find out." The human fleet began to advance, moving with the same perfect coordination that had characterized all their previous victories. But as they approached the outer defensive perimeter, something extraordinary happened. Space itself began to tear. Massive rifts opened around the human ships, and through these portals emerged the largest fleet anyone in the galaxy had ever seen. Thousands upon thousands of human vessels poured through the dimensional gateways, their hulls gleaming with weapons technology that made their previous achievements look primitive. Admiral Keth's voice crackled over the command center speakers, his professional composure finally breaking. "Your Majesty, sensors show. This can't be accurate. They have more ships than we do. Far more." Zarthak stared at the tactical display in horror. The readings showed over 12,000 human vessels now filling local space. Somehow, in just 6 months, humanity had built a fleet larger than the combined forces of every galactic power. "How?" he whispered. "Industrial capacity." Admiral Jackson's voice carried clearly through the communication channel. "When you threatened our home, you made one critical error. You assumed we were a primitive species barely capable of spaceflight. In reality, we're the most industrialized civilization in the galaxy. We simply hadn't needed a military before you gave us a reason to build one." The human admiral's words hit Zarthak like physical blows. Everything the Empire had believed about humanity was wrong. They weren't primitive metal workers struggling with basic technology. They were an industrial powerhouse that had been focused on peaceful expansion until the Corvans forced them to turn their attention to war. "For 500 years, Admiral Jackson continued, your empire has conquered species that couldn't fight back effectively. You've never faced an enemy with the industrial capacity to match your military production. You've never fought a species that approaches war the way humans do." "And how is that?" Zarthak asked, though he dreaded the answer. "With the understanding that war is not a game or a show of dominance, War is a problem to be solved through the complete elimination of the threat. You wanted to rule us. We have chosen to ensure that you can never threaten anyone again. The human fleet opened fire. What followed was not a battle, but an execution. The weapons humanity now employed made their previous technology look like toys. Reality warping devices that folded space to bring distant targets into point-blank range. Quantum disruptors that unraveled the fundamental forces holding matter together. Temporal weapons that aged enemy ships into dust in seconds. The 8,000 ships of the Imperial Defense Fleet died in less than an hour. Emperor Zarthak watched his empire's final destruction from his bunker, seeing 5 centuries of conquest and domination erased in a single afternoon. Every ship, every space station, every orbital fortress around Corva Prime was methodically destroyed with clinical efficiency. When the space battle ended, the human fleet turned its attention to the planet itself. Not to destroy it, but to demonstrate their complete dominance. Massive projection systems filled the sky with human ships, while loudspeakers broadcast surrender terms in every language known to the Empire. The terms were simple: complete disarmament, dissolution of the imperial government, and the establishment of human oversight for the transition to whatever government the Corvan people chose for themselves. Zarthak realized that fighting was pointless. Humanity had proven they possessed both the technology and the industrial capacity to wipe out any resistance. More importantly, they had demonstrated a strategic thinking that far exceeded anything the Empire had ever encountered. With shaking claws, he activated the emergency broadcast system and transmitted his surrender across all Imperial communication channels. The war that had begun with a demand for submission ended with the unconditional surrender of the galaxy's greatest military power. In the months that followed, the scope of humanity's victory became clear to the rest of the galaxy. The humans didn't simply conquer the Corvan Empire. They dismantled it entirely, liberating hundreds of enslaved species and establishing a new galactic order based on cooperation rather than domination. Other powers that had considered challenging humanity quickly reconsidered when they realized the true scope of human capabilities. The species that had seemed like primitive newcomers just a year before had proven themselves to be the most formidable military force in known space. The galaxy learned a hard lesson. Never mistake human restraint for human weakness. The species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war among themselves was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. When finally provoked to violence, they had responded with a totality that erased their enemies from existence. In the end, the Corvan Empire's demand for submission had indeed been answered with total destruction. But it was not Earth that was destroyed. It was the Empire itself, and every threat it might have posed to the galaxy's future freedom.